Good morning. I'm Arnold Baker, Chief, Chelan County Fire District 5, and I want to talk with you about Emergency Response E and my partner, Kathy.
Good morning, Kathy Clay, Battalion Chief, Jackson Hole Fire EMS, and Fire Marshal here as well.
In community risk reduction, we look at emergency response as a very important part of the 5Es. But we can kind of get down into the details of how we've changed our response, but we still, in the COVID response time, we have done things a little differently. Doing the, if we got EMS calls, we're going in, we still have our standards of cover. We're still going to bring in the same number of people, but maybe we're not rushing in the first wave if we've got that. Our dispatch center is taking in information, and we get the little clue from dispatch to say PPE advised. Well, we know that PPE is advised on every call, but when you get it from dispatch, that's the clue to say this is a high risk potential for COVID. And so in that case, we're going to send in one responder to evaluate, size up, and feedback to the group as to what's needed in that scene.
When I think back for our department about the year, and especially specific to community risk reduction, I remember in February contemplating what are the risks this month for Jackson Hole Fire EMS, and how dramatically that changed when March came. We sat down as a combination department the first week of March and realized that our risk changed significantly in our little community. I think the adaptability part for our emergency response has never been underlined in boldface quite so much as it has been with the entrance of COVID into our communities. It has become every one of our communities' number one risk as we mitigate the various components of the virus. Not only do we need to keep our community healthy, but we have to keep our emergency responders healthy to be able to take care of our community. And that was on the forefront of our thinking at Jackson Hole Fire EMS. We are led by an incredible medical director, Dr. Will Smith. Dr. Smith started working with us quickly on proper protection, right? The PPE that we needed to stay safe, to be able to respond to these 911 calls. We also realized that our ambulances were at risk of becoming contaminated. So we took an ambulance out of service and actually made it specific to COVID response. We taped up all the equipment. We taped up the front compartment from the back compartment. We changed the airflow in that compartment so that it would protect the driver in better fashion. And we really had immediate procedures and protocols on how to decontaminate after transporting a COVID patient. So there's a really great example of a sudden change of adaptability for a new risk in a community that we put in place right away.
But Kathy, look at what has changed also in our communities inside the firehouse. PPE, wearing masks. Firefighters have been a little on the resistance in the past, and it's become the norm. And we're taking a mask to the patient and putting a mask on the patient. And I think that there's community-wide, there is a change in what we're seeing in the culture of how PPE is viewed and how decon is viewed. We would look at a COVID scene as a hazmat where we had hot, warm, and cold zones, and we're sliding into those almost automatically, where they had to be, really thought through in the past.
In the beginning, we had a hard time with that cultural change, Chief. We had firefighters that would show up in engines to respond and help that weren't masked. And I think it's the big problem with COVID is that we trust our families and we trust our friends, because we just don't believe that they could possibly give us something like COVID. And if you're going to change a culture, You need to have people affected directly. And once our people realized that this could get me, that my friend driving could be shedding virus and asymptomatic. Once that became part of the thinking, the culture changed almost overnight for us. Everybody now comes wearing a mask and ready to mask a patient. We're real close to pretty much making the assumption that everybody we respond to is positive, and that way we're all protected. So it's been a fast culture change. And as you think and study cultures, I think that the most successful way to change a culture is by having people recognize this is how it affects you. This is how it's going to help you if you change your culture. And it's been kind of fun and exciting to watch that culture change, knowing that our people are better protected at the end of it.
We had a volunteer come to a drill, and he was just fine at the beginning of drill, and he went home and then came down with the symptoms. So we had it became real. And so, COVID became real, and it's kind of like we had a close call. Nobody else had a exposure from that. And so we tested heavily for a 2-week period, and we never had any exposures beyond the one coming in. But it was kind of like, okay, this is real. It could take down the fire department and really change that, having a manpower pool to respond. So the wake up call, and we adapted, and it was kind of like tighten things up. It was easy to get slack, and now it's kind of a be real and think about it all the time. And yes, you're right, Kathy. If somebody could, one of our own could hand it, pass it off to us.
I think the real lesson for COVID too is, as we examine community risk reduction, to realize that, there'll be another risk that comes to our communities. And it's important to just be mindful to constantly check in, whether you're a big community and you're using data to make those decisions about what is our current risk right now, what's happening, or whether you're a small community like us. I hear every single 911 call that comes in. If we get 5 chimney fires, in a couple of weeks, I need to change my thinking and start to educate our public about, holy cow, you all forgot to clean your chimneys this year. What's going on, right? And community risk is really, it's something that has to be evaluated constantly. Right now, COVID's on front and center for all of us. It's our number one community risk. But we need to be mindful that there are other things that can happen that can outweigh the risk at any time. And we have to be quick and adaptable and flexible to adapt to those risks so we can get the education out to our community, because they want to know too.
Well, look what happens with that. Just for instance, your chimney fires. And, if we do the prevention and then we're preventing the call, we're preventing a potential exposure to our firefighters. Every call that we can prevent. And so it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's why we do this thing, is to prevent the exposure, but to protect the public and to prevent the call from ever happening. So it took on new meaning, and so I think for emergency response that we've seen this come around, that community risk reduction is really the forefront of the meaning to eliminate and get in front of the call.
Yeah, I so much agree with that, Chief. I years ago, it occurred to me that prevention isn't just about our community, it's about our first responders. And especially as we look at the carcinogens that they're getting exposed to with fire, and now we look at a virus that's incredibly contagious, to be able to prevent the incident in the first place, getting ahead of the call, should be our number one mission in all of our bureaus and all of our fire departments and all of even our collaborating partners, right? Because this is a public health issue, and we've worked with our public health folks to help reduce that risk as well. So that's a great sum up of what we're talking about today with adaptability and emergency services. I like your comments, I like your thoughts, and thanks everybody for watching this and thinking about emergency services and how we adapt from community risk reduction.
Thank you for joining us today in emergency response in community risk reduction.